theoretically, the first satellite in orbit was in 1954. It was an atomic test outside of Las Vegas, and they put a manhole cover over the top of the hole, and they lit the thing off, and they estimated it did reach orbital velocity. But we didn't have NORAD tracking stuff back then, so don't really know. My theory is it vaporized almost immediately. But so as soon as the program gets up, this is a rapidly changing environment. We think of satellites, we think, for my entire life, I was born in 1860. We already had artificial moons circling the Earth in 1960. But we're going through a metamorphosis in this technology. And I also add, this was not the presentation you guys were going to see tonight. Peter Spina was going to be here. He had to cancel at the last minute, so I apologize, but I hope you find this interesting as well. Let's go to the next one. So, low Earth orbit. What does that mean? It's roughly the area that occupies between 300 and 1,000 miles above Earth. And low Earth orbit, essentially to put something into orbit, you have to achieve orbital velocity, which is about 17,500 miles per hour. When I was at Marquette, and actually all the way through the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a contest to see who could be the first private company to put something into orbit. There was a huge prize offered to do that. You think about that, that's only 20 years ago that was finally achieved, and where we've gone in that time now. SpaceX has launched their 63rd satellite or rocket this year successfully. Their only failure, if you want to call it failure, was a test. Their largest rocket that they were attempting to launch down in Texas, and it was a test. They have been 100% successful with the Falcon 9 and the other spacecraft they launched, Falcon Heavy. On top of it, they've taught the rest of the industry how to reuse things. There's boosters now that are used for the 12th and 13th time. Those boosters take the rocket up, the first stage goes up, and instead of wasting all that material, it comes back down, and they actually land it softly, upright, on a platform out in the water, and then they reuse it. So not only have we seen this huge change in how we put stuff into space, but we've tried to make it a lot more environmentally friendly. The fuels that they use are liquid oxygen and essentially methane. We're not using all these other nasty chemicals we used to use. They get enough boost, enough impulse to put stuff into orbit with those fuels as well. So there's no acid byproducts or strong acid and other noxious byproducts afterward. So the Russians beat us to it. October 4th, 1957 was done all in secrecy. Our CIA didn't know what was going on. They didn't have a clue. They knew that something was in process, but when that thing was up there in orbit, and all of a sudden ham radio operators, and I'm a ham operator myself since I was 12 years old, ham operators tuned to 20 megahertz on their ham radio set, and every 90 minutes they heard beep, 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 and they went outside and looked and watched this thing go overhead. And it freaked them out. I mean, it freaked everybody out because the Russians could orbit something and we could not. So, the satellite was small, 23 inches in diameter. It was vacuum tube technology. If you really want to do some digging into this, they use something called rod tubes. Most vacuum tubes, which you guys never see them now, but most vacuum tubes had screened elements and then a solid plate. Rod tubes were literally a cylinder of glass with a bunch of rods stuck into them and a filament on one end to cause a cloud of electrons to be able to be emitted, and then the rods directed the energy. They were very inefficient, but they're incredibly robust. I actually have some. You can buy them on eBay to this day. And when you look at it, you go, these things are indestructible. So that transmitter was like 20 milliwatts. and it only ran for a few days. We've got the time on here. It stayed in orbit until January 4th, 1957. That's not very long. And why did it only stay in orbit that long? Because it had a very elliptical orbit. Rockets were not that powerful then. They got the thing to achieve orbital velocity, but a very elliptical orbit. So it came back within 135 miles of Earth every pass, every orbit. You're actually in the still in upper sections of the atmosphere where there's molecular friction taking place, and that causes it to decay very, very quickly. Getting past that was one of the keys, but they showed it could be done. In 50 years later, in February 1957, a bunch of French students and a bunch of Russian students, that shows you how much different things are today. French, Russia, US, Europe, all getting along and basically working together. It wouldn't happen today, right now, in our current situation, but they built a 1/3 scale replica. High school students built this thing, and a cosmonaut, Russian astronaut, took it as part of his stuff, got into a spacecraft. They launched him up to the Mir space station, which was still active at the time, and he got into the space station and said, I'm doing a spacewalk, pulled a little plug on the thing to turn it on, tossed it out like a baseball, and the thing orbited the Earth for about 3 months. And again, us ham guys went out and listened to it again. But a bunch of high school students did it. They recreated it 50 years later, and it worked. It worked exactly like the first one did. Let's go to the next slide. So we enter the race. This guy here, Dr. James Van Allen, University of Iowa, guy to really take a look at. If you haven't studied him, very, very interesting. Very, very parallel to some professors I had here at Marquette, like Dr. Ishii, Dr. Horgan, Art Muller, guys like that. Just a very cool guy. Really, really, these are the professors I had that were the inspiration to me to do what I do my whole career today. So we build Explorer 1, and we get a much bigger rocket. We get one that, for launching nuclear missiles at Russia, and pack it as full as we can. And still, we only get the thing up to 222 miles by 1,580 miles. So the thing is screaming out beyond what we call low Earth orbit, up to middle Earth orbit, barely, but getting out there and coming back. But as a consequence of being up that extra 100 miles, instead of it coming down 3 months later, it came down March 31st, 1970. Now you look at that and you say, this is 6 months after the Russians put something up. But we said, okay, we lost the race. So the argument was made, do we launch tomorrow, back in October 5th, October 6th, or do we use this to do some science? And so they said, we're gonna do some science. We're already second. So they put in a Geiger counter, Geiger Mueller tube, put in temperature sensors, put in an acoustic detector, and built a wire grid around the whole spacecraft to measure the impacts of micrometeorites while it was in operation. All stuff to think about pushing towards putting man into space, or human into space, and all the safety issues. And as a result, the Geiger counter was saturated. It just sat there glowing like a neon bulb. It wasn't going click, 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 click. It was like stuck on. And Dr. Van Allen began to finally understand how strong the cosmic rays were, and how what's now known as the Van Allen belt, the protective magnetic and shield that we effectively have, the magnetosphere around the Earth, protects us from this really harmful, deadly solar radiation. So out of Explorer 1, the first thing we put in orbit, we already learned a ton of science. So first truly scientific satellite with huge implications that everybody sat back and went, we got problems to solve before we're gonna stick a guy up there. Or, we're gonna stick somebody up there, but not for very long. Yep. So, let's go to the next one. So now let's go from low Earth orbit to middle Earth orbit. And here's a satellite that, again, was an elliptical orbit, Telstar. And this thing was the first actual communication satellite. People made telephone calls over this. Television networks relayed television signals from across the US and into Europe over this thing. This is only, a couple years later, 3 years later, and we've got already a full communication satellite. This thing is still up there. It stopped functioning after about 6 months because its batteries went bad and there wasn't enough solar panels. I mean, it was designed to charge rudimentary batteries and last 6 months. That was it. That's still in orbit because look at its apogee, 3,687 miles. That thing is gone way out there, elliptical orbit. When it comes back in, it never gets closer to about 600 miles. So the amount of drag on that satellite is minimal. That guy's gonna be up there for another 50 years, at least. So, which we're gonna talk a little bit later about space garbage, space junk. Because now we're starting to put stuff up there that stays up there. And as we put more and more up, we have to worry about something else hitting it. And think about one object hitting another object, it shatters into a lot of pieces. Now every one of those pieces is moving at 17,000 miles an hour or more. And now you have a chain reaction. Next one. Geosynchronous satellites. So back in 1929, this guy Herman Potocnik described both geosynchronous orbits and the special case of a geosynchronous orbit that was particularly useful for, he said, space stations, but in reality, it's communications. Most of the television that you watch today, over cable television at least, is relayed through geosynchronous satellites. And this little picture here is showing the satellite, 23,500 miles out, is rotating at exactly, it's rotating with the proper velocity so that the surface of the Earth appears to be stationary to it. So they stay in a fixed position. Now, this can only occur at the equator, and that's the only place that geosynchronous satellites can be parked and remain stationary. And so you could see every 2 degrees around the Earth, we could park satellites and, wonder why there's none here. It's a little water, nothing to talk to. So these guys, and you could see in some cases only one active satellite, in some cases there's as many as 4 or 5, including replacement satellites. But those parking spots are full. And RF energy to reach these satellites, because they're in 2-degree orbits, we need large dishes. When I was here at Marquette, we could watch a satellite in its 4-degree orbit with a 6-foot dish. Now, for this, what we call the C-band at 4 gigahertz, we need a dish that's somewhere 12 feet or larger, because we have to focus the beam even narrower to not light up, illuminate the next satellite 2 degrees off from it. So it's become more and more difficult. But on the good side of it, these guys are always in sunlight. They're always getting their batteries charged. In fact, most of the power comes strictly from the solar cells on it, the photovoltaic cells. And they have the ability to stay parked, so you could point a dish and never really have to move it. Now, in reality, there are some forces. You could have a coronal mass ejection from the sun. The solar wind itself can move these satellites around, so in reality, each of these little birds up there has a little system of gas engines. It's not a rocket in that it's not a flame or a burning rocket, it's just a release of gas. And they, on a daily basis, make sure they stay within a 70 by 70 by 70 mile box. So there is control of these satellites. When they run out of that gas and they start to fall out of that box, they have to be sent back in towards Earth, and ultimately they're burned up in the atmosphere. But they want them out of geosynchronous orbit because those parking spots are worth gold, and there aren't a lot of them. So 23,000 miles from Earth, requires large dishes, or what we call VSAT terminals. It's a synthetic aperture terminal. Those only work well for pretty narrow data rates and things like that. We call those flyaway cases. You see news guys use those. They can set them up in about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and start using the satellite. But deployment times of 20 and 30 minutes today are a joke. So let's go to the next one.
Craig, can I ask a question
Yeah.
before you move on? How many can they stack up in a spot?
They can only have 1 or 2 active in a spot. They stack up to 5 because they have redundancy. And in some of the spots, I should back up and say, some of the spots have satellites that operate in different pieces of spectrum, so they can then have more, but those are more specialized use cases. That, you know, we talk about it, they'll come and take me. So let's go. There's another special case of satellites called a Molniya satellite. It's a Russian invention of sorts. So we've got low Earth orbit, we've got mid-Earth orbit, we've got geosynchronous, and then we have highly elliptical orbits. And these things are very cool because they're shot into almost a polar orbit. Their rotation, again, is exactly the same speed as the Earth, but because it's this highly elliptical thing, it jumps up and goes from not being visible at all to being highly visible, stays visible for 8 hours as it hits its apex and then starts coming back around, sits there within a very small window, so you don't need much tracking, and then it comes back down and the next one snaps up. So you see these in triplets. They'll send up 3 of them, and each one does 8 hours worth of service. The Russians use a lot of these, especially up for Siberia and areas like that, far northern latitudes, because think about, if you ever go to Alaska, for example, and you look at satellite dishes that are trying to look at geosynchronous satellites, they're aimed at the horizon. And there's a lot of ground clutter, there's a lot of issues with that. When you look at a Molniya satellite, you're like at the Arctic Circle, and they're pointed like this. So they did that. Now, to get these things in orbit requires a tremendous amount of energy. The rockets that are used to do this could almost take you to the moon. But once they're in orbit and they've achieved the proper velocity to stay in that orbit, just like Telstar did, it will stay there for a long, long time. So that's kind of a special use case. You'll see those. I don't think the U.S. has any Molniya satellites outside of defense. And Scandinavian countries do, Russia does. Everything down in the southern hemisphere isn't that far south. You look at the southern tip of Chile and Argentina, and it's not that far south. So equatorial-based stuff works fine there. Okay, let's go to the next one. So, and then the final case, we all use GPS. GPS satellites are a case of mid-Earth orbit. They're all between 1,000 and about 1,800 miles up. GPS is a really unique constellation. And now GPS, GLONASS, Beidou in China, Galileo for the European Union, they all use very similar techniques. GLONASS for Russia does have higher inclined orbits, again, to cover, well, there's subtitles and stuff like that in Siberia, outside of Siberia. But there's 3 orbits like this, and this guarantees that you have 3 different orbital planes, so 3 different altitudes, so 3 different timing sequences, that you can use to derive a very precision location on any point on Earth from, and it guarantees that there's at least 8 satellites. So it's a relatively inexpensive means to guarantee that you have 4 satellites to get a position fix and a timing fix, and 4 more as an alternate minimum at any point on Earth. This was already in process when I was here at Marquette. They were already deploying some of those satellites. It didn't become public until the late 80s. And then towards the end of the Clinton administration in the late 90s, it was made fully civilian operational. They took away something called selective availability, which limited the accuracy of it. Once that occurred, we can use this for, every one of our phones has it. We use it when we're driving somewhere. It can tell what lane we're in. The theoretical accuracy for civilians now is on the order of about 5 to 10 centimeters, and you can actually do better than that. For agricultural uses, John Deere, for example, gets centimeter and under accuracy where they have fully automated tractors and things that drive out in the fields, doing the planting, doing the weeding, doing anything else, and they hit the rows perfectly and avoid any crop damage in the process. The implications of satellite and GPS to all of this as civilians, we don't even think about it anymore, we just take it for granted, but it's amazing. So we've gone from geosynchronous back to mid-Earth orbit, kind of pulling stuff back towards Earth. Let's go to the next one. So now, geosynchronous really has reached maturity. There's not much more to do out there other than make a satellite that can last longer or have a higher power budget, require a little bit less power from Earth to talk to it. But it's basically mature. So what's happening now is we're getting back into low Earth orbit satellites. And the reasons are going to become very obvious. In the past, low Earth orbit satellites it was too expensive to build a constellation sufficient to do communications with it. When you think about, these things only have a 3 to 5 minute window that each satellite's visible. You have to hand off one satellite to the next, to the next, to the next, every 3 to 5 minutes. You want to maintain continuous communications. And think about how many satellites it takes to do that. So here we have the first true LEO system of communications for cellular communications for the consumer was Iridium. And I was actually part of that project. And most of us in engineering, it was driven very hard by a senior engineer, very senior level engineer, who wanted to show the world that we could provide cellular communications anywhere on the globe. And the calculations were done that said we need 77 satellites to do that. And then further calculations were done that showed, no, you can do it with 66. We acquired spectrum, we got 5 megahertz, 5 plus 5 megahertz, almost worldwide. Out of the 196 countries in the world, we had permission to operate in over 180 of them from overhead. It was a huge, huge investment in the mid-90s. It was a $3 billion project. And what did they miss? And as an engineer, well, we kind of make fun, I make fun a lot of marketing teams and those people, those non-technical people I work with, but their numbers are important. And if there's any other takeaway you get today, Motorola lost their ass on Iridium. They spent $3 billion, and in 2.5 years it was in bankruptcy. And the reason was they underestimated how fast terrestrial cellular systems would expand around the world. They thought, we're never going to see these things in Africa. We're never going to see the big chunks of South America. India can't afford it. India can't afford it. So what happens? As these things are being launched, and we're hyping the launch of these satellites, people are building out cellular systems worldwide, terrestrial systems, and communication, at least voice telephony, was almost ubiquitous. It was everywhere. So the main reason for a narrow spectrum, 5 megahertz of spectrum in space, kind of went away. What's kept Iridium alive to today is that it's used for special use cases. It's used for police departments. It's used for communications where you have no other resources at all, and it's used by defense. It's still a viable network. The people that bought it out of bankruptcy have actually replaced the entire constellation, and they have a business model that works. But what it did teach us is that satellites don't have to be really expensive. We cut the cost of building a satellite to 1/20th of what it was initially. We were building these things like we were building cell phones. It's like, okay, here's another one, throw it up into space. The expensive part for us was the launch vehicles. We were still paying to launch them because there was no SpaceX. We were paying Ariane, we were paying, we put a lot of them up on Russian rockets. It was as cheap as we could get, but it was still really expensive. So there were other LEO systems proposed. Teledesic wanted to do internet service, and get this, 720 megabits per second downlink and 100 megabits per second uplink that you get to share with everybody in the footprint of this. I get 10 times that uplink off of my fiber cable system at home every day. And I'll blow your mind with another fact in a few minutes, but the scales of the economy failed. They never got off the ground. They went bankrupt before they launched the first satellite. And then finally, Globalstar put up 48 satellites. Globalstar got their stuff in orbit. They spent almost 15 years kind of fumbling around, and now they've signed a deal with Apple that every iPhone 14 and every Apple since has emergency SOS on it using Globalstar's network. Apple dumped a ton of money in the Globalstar. They effectively own 85% of their capacity for that service. So, but what's happening is we're saying, okay, we had this huge hype curve. We jumped up there, and everybody was excited and everything, and then reality set in, and now reality's taking over. So let's go to the next one. Next generation, SpaceX, OneWeb, Iridium Next, Amazon Kuiper, Telsat, and now finally 3GPP, the world standards group that does cellular. All of our cell phones are basically operating 3GPP standards worldwide. Perhaps might be some China stuff that's not 3GPP, but other than that, it all is. All of them have now said, okay, space is the next frontier, to quote a stupid line from a TV show. But it really is. SpaceX has over 5,000 satellites already up there. The Starlink system. They just launched, 2 days ago, they just launched another 60 of them. They launch them in 60s and 120s. And if you pick the right time of the day or night, you can actually see about 24 hours after launch, before they deployed into their final orbit, you look at the sky and you see them kind of trailing across the sky. When this first started happening, it freaked people out. I was in Pennsylvania, and my sister-in-law calls me and says, I think we're being invaded. At like 11 o'clock at night, and I got up my laptop and went, no, don't worry about it. It's another SpaceX launch. But now people, they see them and they know what they look like. These satellites, you can see, this really is a bus. This is the top of the SpaceX Falcon 9. And every one of them is a satellite packed in here. Like I said, they can launch up to 120 at a time. It's the scales of economy. You're going to hear that a lot in engineering, but the scales of economy have finally come into a place where this can be done. Every one of those satellites has a bidirectional capability of 30 gigabits per second. And the next generation of satellites that they've already started putting up, double that to 60 gigabits per second. a tremendous amount of data that they can move up and down. And when you look on the footprint, which we're gonna, let's actually jump to the next slide. Okay, let's back up a little bit here. They started launching 2.5 years ago. The funny thing was the first generation of dish actually looked like a little dish, and they're heated to melt snow in the wintertime, and that was a real problem. Feral cats would go and, hey, this dish is warm, I'm gonna sit on it, now you don't have any coverage. You go out and you look at there's a stupid cat sitting there. So Elon Musk, like him or hate him, he does have a weird sense of humor. So now when you get a Starlink system, he sends you a couple of stickers, one for Starlink and one for Cat 5. Even though they don't make that dish anymore. There's one of those on the back of my car down on Renee Street, by the way. So there's 2 flavors of dish that are current today. The residential one, which is about this big by that wide, and the commercial one, which is about that by that. This one does dual satellite tracking and meets all commercial requirements. You can get up to 300 megabits per second bidirectional on that commercial dish. People at home are seeing, in rural areas, they're seeing downlink speeds approaching 200 megabits per second. And in a rural area for $90 a month, it's pretty cheap internet. And guess what? No infrastructure. You buy that dish, put it out there. Nobody has to trench fiber to your home. You don't have to wait another 10 years for the Fiber to Everybody Act to maybe take place. You can do that today. So we've really brought, again, like I said, like him or hate him, he has really opened up horizons for many, many things. That's gonna be my last slide when we get to that one. So the constellation is about 1/5 built. Next year, they are gonna start launching 1,000 satellites in 2024 that are strictly to do text messaging and emergency messaging to our cell phones. And in 2025, they'll launch another 1,000 and you'll be able to place a phone call, voice over LTE, VoLTE call from your cell phone anywhere in the country through those satellites anytime of the day or night, as long as you have a view of the sky. You'll have to go outside. But think about it, you're driving down the road somewhere very rural, no cellular service, plenty of that yet. You'll have service. You just place your emergency call, and instead of it going over a terrestrial public carrier system, cellular system, it's gonna go through the satellite. So things are changing. As I said, there's exponential change in how we are going to be communicating. We thought the internet was incredible, and the internet speeds and things we're seeing, but now it's just not that track anymore. It's opening up into so many things. Communications is going to change radically over the next 5 years, 7 years at the most. Let's go to the next one. So here's the current constellation. In fact, if you want to click on that link, and then zoom in on the US, so you have to rotate the globe, and you can zoom in. These are the effective cells from space, because your signal goes from the Starlink dish up to the satellite down to an Earth station, and the furthest it ever goes is about, on ground is about 300 miles from where anybody is located. They have built out Earth stations in every cell already. So where are we? I can hardly see the map, but yeah, we're somewhere in here. And you can see these are all the satellites that are already that are visible. And you can go plus or minus 2 cells from an Earth station. Eventually, when the constellation's full, every cell will have at least 1 satellite all the time. And every one of those will bring 60 gigabits per second capability. And to me, that is just amazing. We used to fight to do 1,200 bits per second, or 300 bits per second. When I was here at Marquette, we had dial-up terminals that had an acoustic coupler. You dropped the phone into it and you sat at a terminal, and at 300 bits per second, we had to do our engineering projects. And, you know, we would go over to the building we went to, where we had to go in the basement. It was one of the
I don't remember.
physics lab or something. And, you know, you'd sign up for time at 1 in the morning to get your half hour to do your work. It's just incredible now. I could sit here, sit in my car, which would be one of my last topics. I could sit in my car and do more work in 15 seconds than I could do in an hour sitting in the lab here back then. And I could be cruising down the road doing it. So, let's break out of this and go back to the. Oh, here, this is actually, before you go, that's the launch from 2 nights ago. They haven't dispersed them yet. That's what they look like. So we're back into the map here. Yeah, let's go back into the presentation map. And next screen. So, how well does it work? I have, down in Crystal Lake, 45 miles out of Chicago, I have, since last October, I have 2 deployed systems on a test site. One is a residential system, one's a commercial dual track system. And I'm measuring round trip latency, packet loss, and, what's the other one? I forget. Jitter time. How much does the data move around as you hand off satellite to satellite, things like that. My round trip delays, so this is both directions, average around 70 milliseconds. My one-way ping, if I do a speed test, it's about 30, 35 milliseconds. It's just like it is over my internet connection through Comcast. Packet loss, about every 4 or 5 hours, these are 20-minute breaks here, about every 4 or 5 hours, I'll see one burst of about a 50% packet loss. And why is that? It's a time when I've got a handoff from a satellite that's approaching one horizon to one that's coming up across another horizon. And I may lose a packet or 2. Error correction takes care of it, but it still occurs. That's going to get driven to almost 0. This is going to be so good in the next couple of years that the high-speed traders are going to be using this to be doing trade across continents. So today they expend a lot of money to build microwave links to minimize, to take milliseconds of delay time out of the path so they don't have to use the public internet. To get a trade made 3 milliseconds before somebody else does and beat them to it. Well, now they're going to do this on an international basis. They'll be trading on Hang Seng or on one of the other markets from here over satellite. And in fact, to keep this latency low, the Starlink satellites, when you go from one continent to another, no longer have to come down to Earth and back up and then hop across. They have optical communication systems. They're lasers, satellite to satellite. So this is like really bizarre stuff. And it's happening, again, as I said, so quickly. So let's go to the next one. I recently took a trip. It was from my home down to almost the Mexican border. I was 50 miles from the Mexican border, about 10 miles inside Arizona from the New Mexico border, to test our public safety systems over geosynchronous satellite, or I'm sorry, over LEO, over Starlink satellite. Left my home, first hour, surface roads. Rest of it down to Wichita is interstate. From Wichita all the way down to Las Cruces is secondary highways. Then it's I-10, and then the last 35 miles was a really small 2-lane highway. Over the course of 3,700 miles, I had 213 outages greater than 100 milliseconds, because that's the minimum time I could measure. But greater than 2 seconds, there were only 18 of them, so it's about 2/3 of an outage per hour, not even 1 per hour, and they are all caused by overpasses. Whereas these were still caused by handoff, 100 or 200 millisecond satellite handoff and things like that, which is going to get a lot better. Greater than 5 seconds, I had 4 of them. Every one of those was restart the system, wait for it to come back up and establish communications. That was it. I mean, this thing is already incredible. I then drove up to about 9,200 feet, parked my car. That is my car, and on top of it, this little thing is the satellite flat panel for Starlink. Parked there. So here I'm driving, I got outage because of all the tree cover, and this is a very steep mountain to the left of me there. And as I sat there, the outages started going away, and I realized what happened was the system is sitting there and learning its environment and saying, I got an outage here, I got another satellite I can look at. And it's jumping, and it's learning what parts of the sky are visible. And within 10 minutes or so, I was actually very, very little outage. Parked there, doing work again. And then I started driving and lost it again because I got covered, tree cover and stuff like that, real steep tree cover. So the moral of the story there was, if I bring this to an incident, it would take me 20 minutes plus to set up a VSAT terminal to talk to a geosynchronous satellite. That's 20 minutes with no communications. In this case, I park it, I have some intermittent communications within 90 seconds, and within 8 to 10 minutes, the system has learned enough that I have almost continuous communications. So I've cut my deployment time at least in half, and probably better than that. So as I said, it's really game changing for so many industries. Let's go to the next one. So there's other stuff too. We have another satellite company called AST that is working on doing direct handset voice communications. They have placed their first phone call. They've got a bunch of challenges. The spectrum they're using requires incredibly huge satellite panels. They're very expensive. The system works, but again, do the economies of scale work? We'll see. And let's go to the next one. So what are the social implications here? Well, we've got education anywhere. In the early 2000s, I spent a lot of time in Namibia, in Africa. And I actually visited a number of schools out of Windhoek, which is the capital. You get outside of Windhoek and the population density is small. They have these little one-room schoolhouses. Teacher comes, not every day, and they try to have somebody there, but the education is so limited. The kids are actually incredible. I miss going there, working with them. It's one of the African nations where they speak English, so it's easy for us to go there and do things. Now with already the metamorphosis is incredible. They're already placing Starlink dishes there and other system dishes. And the teachers brought in, when the teacher's not there live, their education is brought basically like we're doing here. It's on a screen and it can be individualized. You see here, look at this. They've all got little cheap laptops that they're using, all connected through satellite to get their individualized education. This is very much like one of the schools. This isn't one that I was at. This is very much what they were like. And it's just absolutely incredible. From a safety standpoint, remote monitoring, detect pipeline leaks, all those kinds of things become incredibly more instantaneous, and you can measure so much more data than you could before. So it makes our world a lot safer from that standpoint. It's public safety, my area at Motorola. Keeping them connected everywhere. No matter how good our terrestrial systems are, we got outage areas. And now, when we get into an outage area, they'll communicate through satellite. satellite doesn't solve everything, especially in a deep urban area, we call them urban canyons. But you put together terrestrial narrowband systems, cellular systems, and satellite, and you have continuous coverage. I don't care where you are, you've got continuous coverage. That officer is a lot safer. Remote science, much easier. When I was in Africa, my main goal over there was we were building an observatory that could be, astronomical observatory that could be remotely controlled, and actually was used by the University of Chicago for education efforts with high school kids, grade school and high school kids. And we paid incredible amounts of money to use a geosynchronous satellite, and an image took 3 or 4 minutes to upload one image and then get it on our end, because pretty slow bit rate. And now with Starlink, the people that are now running that observatory, we're getting tens of images per second. It's amazingly fast. I said third world education, critical infrastructure, safety for all, and there's a lot more solutions. Let's go to the next one. So there's a lot of concerns. Especially the amateur astronomy community says, all these satellites cause problems for us. Well, when I started doing astrophotography back in the 80s, yeah, we'd open a camera up and we'd have to sit there and manually track the object we were photographing for 2, 3, and 4 hours at a time, and any satellite that flew through it left its mark. Okay, now, the way we do it is we take 15, 20, 30-second at most exposures. We just keep taking them, and then we electronically charge a couple devices, and we electronically stack them. And if we got one that's got a satellite in it, we toss it out. It's only a little bit of information that's lost, and it's all theoretically the same information. So the problem that existed is nowhere near as great today as it would have been 20 or 30 years ago. People are concerned about space debris. These very low Earth orbit, their deorbit systems are very, very well defined. They actually have to have motors that when they want to take it out of service, or if there's a failure detected, it's automatically deorbited and burned out in the lower atmosphere. So accidents can happen, but these systems are designed for that type of avoidance. Can it be turned off? Yeah, that's a big thing. A lot of people don't like Elon Musk. And even though it's his company building this, you got Glenn and several other people that are really responsible for it. Yes, they could turn it off, but it makes no sense from a business standpoint. Why? You've got all this stuff orbited, and you spent a ton of money putting it up there, and you gotta make that money back. And if you piss off somebody, you're gonna have, for every person you anger, you're gonna have 100 more walk away, or more. So, turning it off just makes zero sense. Can they be ordered to be turned off? That's happened in Ukraine. And that's what's got people concerned, because it's been ordered to be done in Ukraine from time to time. And because it's being used for defense purposes in Ukraine. But overall, reliability of service, yes, there are some rate outage issues that are very, very limited. The newer satellites do a lot of avoidance of rain outage by using different frequencies. And like I said, ultimately this is designed for business, including high-speed trading. An outage of 20 or 30 milliseconds is disastrous to them. So the system's designed to have that kind of robustness. Environmental impact of launches. SpaceX reuses the boosters. It's not a once and throw it away. Others are going to start doing the same thing. The fuels chosen today may not have the same amount of energy per unit volume, but they're safe. And the decision is made to use safe energy. It's much cleaner than the shuttle ever was going to. So, and I like to say, let's keep the personal issues out of the discussion. We can all hate or like the individuals that do this, Bezos and Musk and others. But overall, it's a positive for mankind. And I like to tell people, I'm in meetings at work where somebody doesn't like Musk. And they're like, why are we testing this? We're not gonna work with him. I go, well, you're not gonna work with him, but overall, think about what this means to public safety, critical infrastructure, and stuff like that. Do you really wanna say no? Or do you wanna actually move everything forward for a better and safer world? Okay. I think in the past I've talked to, keep the personal issues out of things. Work with everybody, try to get along, collaborate. That's how we get things done properly. Okay, moving forward, we're gonna have Internet of Things. We're gonna control. I'm gonna know that the gas company's gonna know my propane tank in northern Wisconsin's almost empty because it's gonna communicate to a satellite and say, he's at 10%, bring him some fuel. No longer do I have to waste a truck driving out and checking the gauge and saying, oh, he's almost out of fuel. Or I drove out here for no reason at all because he's at 35%. This is all gonna be done automatically. Direct to handset insures, that's safety. I'm driving through central New Mexico where there's no cellular service, I can still pick up the phone and call. Always connected when you wanna be. I turn my phone off on the weekends because I got to the point where they're calling me from work on a Saturday afternoon, I'm trying to get something else done, I'm like, you don't owe me right now. So, when you wanna be connected, you will be able to be connected regardless of where you are. Education, as I said, in the emerging world is growing exponentially. It's not linear, it's exponential. It's amazing. And overall, we're teaching so many people, so many young people, science and math and reading. That has to have a good effect. And many, many more. Let's go to the, so finally, any questions or comments? I will say, those of you that are going back to the house, this is on my car. I've had it on my car since last October. I have driven 5,400 miles so far testing this system. It's now to the point where when I'm driving out either to northern Wisconsin where the cellular service stinks, or I'm driving out to Arizona and places like that where again the cellular service stinks, my wife is like, you didn't turn it on, did you? Because she's sitting there trying to do stuff on her phone. When the system's turned on in the car, her phone just attaches on Wi-Fi to my satellite service in the vehicle. And she's watching movies and she's looking at, okay, what birds are here? She's a bird. She's like, what birds are here? I gotta get my update. All of that is just happening. She has no idea how. Except she goes, no, did you turn it on? Because I don't have a signal. And I go, oh, shit, no, I didn't. It's really getting to that point. That dish right now is this big. They've got one in front of the FCC now that's this big. And by the end of next year, by the end of 2024, it will be the size of the top of a laptop. That's what you'll be, and it'll be conformal. So it'll go on the roof of your car, lay flat, and you'll have, if you choose to have it, you'll have communications anywhere you go. And our cell phones, my cell phone, I thought, I gotta have a dual WAN switch, all this crap in the vehicle. No, cell phone says, oh, there's no internet service on the satellite, let's go back to LTE 4G because I got a signal. And then when it sees the Wi-Fi signal has internet service, it automatically goes back and I'm not burning up time on my cell system. I'm burning up bits on that. So, and I got a terabyte per month on the satellite. It's pretty hard to burn that up. Yes?
So in the future, when people start using this more, will that affect the speeds or?
It will to some extent, but again, the constellation is growing. The guarantee to a consumer, the target is 100 meg down and 20 meg up. For commercial priority service, it can be up to 300 bi-directional. If you go through the math, and you look at the uptake on it and where you expect the final uptake to be, and there will be in urban areas, there'll be handoff to standard cellular systems and things like that. The numbers work. I gotta give, it's not Musk, I gotta give his engineering team incredible credit. Everybody else sells a lot of BS. They say, this is where we're gonna be, this is what we got, you're gonna love it. They're kind of quiet, and when they do say something, they're confident they're gonna hit it. And I have a non-disclosure agreement with them, I have a couple with them, and I'm seeing their predictions on capacity and coverage, and they're gonna hit it. Will you see some slowdowns? If there were a hurricane, there were an ice storm, and everybody came into a small area, yes. But are you gonna drop below several megabits per second? No. So it's, and that's better than nothing.
Definitely.
Any other questions? I really appreciate you guys coming and listening to this. This is not the talk you were expecting to get tonight, but, you got a question back there?
Is there a theoretical max amount of satellites?
Yeah, we're nowhere near it. There's really no theoretical limit, but there's a practical limit as to how many of them can you control and how close can you space them. That number is in the hundreds of thousands. Think about being 300 miles up, a sphere that is now, almost 30,000 miles in diameter, but it's the entire sphere. How many objects that are 70 miles apart can I pack into it? I'll let you do the math.
So is that the minimum distance they?
Right now, that's what they consider the minimum safe distance. They could be tighter than that, but the satellites aren't designed to have, the coarseness of control today won't do that. These satellites will only last 5 years, 6 years, and they'll be deorbited and replaced. And as other companies, there's already agreements, as other companies start putting satellites up, they've agreed to do tighter and tighter and tighter, which means better control of the satellites. So there's a lot of mutual cooperation going on in that industry to keep it safe. And it has to be. You don't want, even for GPS, with GLONASS, with Russia, and with Fidel, with China, we might be not on the best of terms, but we still have a really tight relationship when it comes to keeping those orbital planes clean and the RF spectrum clean, so we don't interfere with each other. So, again, as I said, there are many, many times when you have to cast aside, dislike or distrust, and still work together, because it's for the overall good. And it helps you, consequently it helps the other person, the other country or entity, but it helps you overall. That's one of the things that was hard for me to learn. My first job at Motorola, I walked in and we were working on a system where there were 5 components, us and 4 enemies, and I just wanted to go kick their butt. And it took a little bit of time for me to realize I still have to go to standards committees. I have to work with them. We don't ultimately beat them, but we didn't beat them by stomping on them or bad mouthing them, which back then we probably would have done. But it was by doing our diligent hard work and still cooperating with them. So that's one of the hardest things you'll find when you get out into the real world is when you're working in teams here, learning, studying, you're learning those values and things. Applying them out there becomes difficult. And there are those that won't. There are people that just cutthroat, brutal. I just hope you don't become one of them.
All right, thanks, Greg.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.